Welcome to the Sparklink Podcast, where you will meet young minds making a large impact one idea at a time. This is Ashna Reddy, your host. As reported by iData Research, there are approximately 1.62 million instrumented spinal surgeries performed annually. As the NCBI reports, only 50% of those are actually successful. This alarming percentage has led to what is now known as FBSS, short for failed back surgery syndrome, which is used to describe continued chronic pain post-surgery. Despite there being advancement in technology, the percentage of failed back surgeries has continued to stay relatively at the same percentage. The causes for these unsuccessful surgeries could be several factors, but some of the most notable ones are improper placement of screws, effects of radiation from medical imaging, and failure to choose the proper surgical choice. As the Mayo Clinic reports, the result of FBSS can include paralysis, intense stinging sensations, and breathing difficulties, all of which that could become permanent effects. By using machine learning and computer vision, Krithik Ramesh, who won the Gordon E. Moore Award, the top prize at the Intel International Science and Engineering Fair, which is the largest pre-collegiate science fair in the world, aims to solve these problems. To get a better understanding of Krithik's solution-creating process, I wanted to ask him why he picked the spine as the part of the body he wanted to help with.
The interesting thing is most of my background and my research was actually in airplanes. I predicted turbulence models over high-ratio aircrafts such that I could see how the wing flutter and characteristic behaviors would affect flight performance. And the interesting thing is, while they seem sort of uncorrelated, I saw a lot of structural similarities between the spine and general wing mechanics. And I saw this as a natural progression for me to use machine learning with engineering to use machine learning with biomedical. And it was just an interesting part of the body. It has the greatest variation in geometric ability. It has the highest number of nerve concentrations apart from the brain. It runs across the better part of your body. And it's just one of the most intricate systems in your body. So I just thought it's a very interesting place to start.
So clearly, the spine has a great deal of control over how our bodies function. So to get a better understanding as to why so many spinal surgeries fail, I asked Krithik what the current system of navigation is to perform these surgeries.
So to give you a quick example of what the current system of navigation is, it's called fluoroscopy. And the way that it works is that it's a lifetime X-ray that looks into the patient so that they can guide the surgeon in real time when they make the placement.
And here are the problems with the current system of navigation, aka fluoroscopy.
University of Minnesota's Department of Orthopedic Surgery found that pedicle screw placement based off of fluoroscopy only had about 76% anatomical accuracy with the actual placement. And considering that you're placing screws into someone's spines, that's a pretty alarming number. And then obviously, as you can probably expect, x-rays have a lot of radiation emission associated with them. So they have a lot of physiological repercussions on the patient, but it's also pretty significant to the actual surgical team that's operating.
Now let's hear what Krithik specifically wanted to change about the system.
So I wanted to find a way where I could mitigate this so that I could create an intelligent navigation system that didn't require extensive radiology. So essentially what I wanted to see is what kind of methodologies for navigation could be used that was, one, obviously not radiation emitting, and the safest and most accurate way of doing this.
Now that we understand the current navigation system, its faults, and Krithik's angle for how he wanted to solve the issues, here's the interesting story behind how Krithik came to figuring out what to use to build his solution.
I was playing Shakira's Hips Don't Lie on my Xbox One X for Just Dance, and essentially I was not doing very well. I think I got 2 stars pretty consistently. So instead of trying to learn the dance and song and everything, the motions, I tried to learn how the motion capture system, i.e. the Kinect, worked. I was looking at patents and the general premise of how motion capture worked, and especially with the 3D environment of the laser sensors. And then I generally thought, what if I could apply this to the spine surgery problem that I presented earlier? So I went about this by pretty much looking at systems of current physical hardware that exists such that I could use 3-dimensional mapping. And a lot of them didn't work. And then I finally found the Microsoft HoloLens, which is like essentially a computer on your head that uses augmented reality. And I think the most common form of augmented reality we're familiar with is Pokemon Go. But essentially what it does is that it projects a three-dimensional hologram when the users are wearing a headset. So essentially what I tried to do was try to create a software onto the Microsoft HoloLens that could project a three-dimensional spine and then provide a lifetime navigation system. So objectively, the hardest part of that was actually finding a HoloLens because they're, one, very rare. And then since they're very expensive, I tried to find someone that could actually let me borrow a very expensive $5,000 headset.
By observing an everyday activity as Just Dance was for Krithik, Krithik was able to create a portable navigation system that doesn't emit radiation. To get a deeper look, here are the mechanics of his headset navigation system.
The way that I went about solving this problem is that I tried to train a machine learning algorithm that could predict spine mechanics and behavioral mechanics. So there have been quite a few papers published on it, but the most notable one was by Kai-Yun Liang. If I'm pronunciation is probably awful, but that's the general premise. And essentially that paper talked about how they developed something called a hierarchical deformable model to predict spinal behavior. So based off that model, I built a more robust machine learning model that could essentially track spinal behavior on a both local and global geometry scale, and then also suggest the correct surgical approach.
Within the system, Krithik created 3 algorithms that all work together to effectively navigate spinal surgeries.
The first one was the hierarchical deformable model, which you fed in the most recent preoperative MRI or CT scan. It would learn the structural analysis features, and then once that was done, I would send it over to something called a region-based convolutional neural network so that I could find the perfect regions behind each of the individual vertebrae. So I knew exactly what the margins were with an accuracy of 98.6% and 1.33 millimeters in precision. So once that was done, it would suggest a surgical approach, and then that would show up as a three-dimensional hologram that would use the real-world data, like a three-dimensional map of the real-world patient spine, and then compare it to the computer-generated one, and then guide the surgeon. So that's done through a process called simultaneous localization and mapping, and collectively those 3 algorithms together created the comprehensive navigation system.
Since Krithik is dealing with a medical solution, his solution had to be credible and validated, and here's how he did it.
Once I developed the system, I had reached out to medical professionals to actually validate my results. So I'm talking to surgical nurses, radiologists, and neurosurgeons to make sure that whatever I had developed had correct accuracy and that they could validate it. So my data set was comprised of roughly 2,000 images from a variety of different open source platforms, so most notably SpineWeb and PAM50. So once I trained my algorithm on those 2,000 different MRI and CT scans, so that I had a comprehensive analysis of like spine behavior. So that included stuff like different kinds of spine tumors, people with spondylitis, stenosis, and osteosarcomas. So different kinds of things that can exist within the spine, and essentially try to osteoporosis. And all of these different things so that I could build a more comprehensive analysis for different kinds of fatigues. And then once that was done, these medical professionals had provided me with 35 surgical data to actually view and make sure that the values that they had done with the actual testing were correlated to the ones that I could predict. And given that, that's how the value of 98.6% and 1.33 millimeters in precision came.
Faulty spinal reconstruction surgeries have been an issue as long as humans have existed. Thus, I knew there had to be other creations that do similar things as Krithik's solution. So I wanted to know what the differentiating factor is.
So I've seen a couple of different systems that actually use the HoloLens for spinal reconstruction surgery, except the premise behind them is that they're pretty reliant still on existing radiology like fluoroscopy to help them. So I'm essentially trying to make it so that all you need is a preoperative MRI or CT scan such that you can actually just use that for the entirety of the surgery. Minimally invasive surgery does require somewhat of an extensive navigation system just because you don't have like a lot of vision. Trying to reduce radiation emission such that physiological repercussions are minimized is the premise. Existing systems don't really have that, but once machine learning becomes more widespread in the medical industry, I feel like it'll become far more practical.
Throughout the solution process, Krithik faced many road bumps, and he went ahead and shared some of them.
Yeah, there were quite a few challenges that I hit along the way. Most predominantly was actually finding the hardware. HoloLenses are very hard to come by, much less getting someone to lend one to you is a very big deal. So I was very happy that Jim Pietla donated me one, and I literally found him through eBay, and I contacted every seller on eBay until someone responded to me to give me a HoloLens. And then from like a more technical standpoint, actually building the algorithm that could predict the spine behavior was incredibly difficult because I think that most machine learning can be classified as like a classical classification, which is like just identifying like between a cat or a dog, or in my case, like what kind of vertebrate is. And those are relatively simple computer science problems. And then simultaneous localization and mapping is one sort of better integrated into the actual development system. So the implementation of it wasn't particularly difficult, but the actual understanding of spine biomechanics required both like medical understanding, structural knowledge, and also a significant understanding of computer science and machine learning to actually develop a comprehensive model.
And here's Krithik's vision for his solution and how he hopes it will impact the world.
What I see this as is like a primer to a step forward in intelligent navigation and intelligent radiology. Currently, the current navigation systems that exist in robotic surgery are all reliant on human intervention. But I think that with artificial intelligence, the rate of accuracy and the consistency at which we can provide crucial surgeries would go up incredibly. Specifically, if we look at more complex like neurosurgeries which require mapping, and even spinal reconstruction surgeries are generally pretty complicated and esoteric. So getting systems that can help with that and do better analysis so that we have better patient outcomes is very key. So I hope that the patents and the papers that I develop and publish will eventually become primers for future research.
For anyone who is starting something or hoping to fulfill an idea or project, here is Krithik's advice.
Well, it's easy to say like you need to do what you love. It's a very hard lesson to learn because doing what you love is gonna generally end up with a lot of roadblocks. So there have been multiple instances where I've just generally wanted to quit science altogether, right? But it's because you stay up late at night thinking about these things and you're like, wow, it's so interesting, and you genuinely want that idea or solution, you end up working towards it. And that it's easy to get intimidated and easy to fall behind on pitfalls, but learning to fail and being on the brink of failure just means that you're one step closer to the right solution.
Krithik is currently filing for a patent and is planning on publishing. Krithik also runs a nonprofit called Empowering Rural India, which aims to provide sustainable solutions to impoverished regions. For example, providing solar panels for schools so they can power themselves completely on renewable energy, or providing a transportation method for people in rural areas to get to school. If you would like to donate, you can go to empoweringri.org, or you can visit Krithik's website at krithikramesh.com. Thank you for supporting this podcast, and please subscribe so you don't miss a new episode every Wednesday. You can also follow this podcast for regular updates on Twitter and Instagram at Sparklink Pod, all lowercase.